Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode in our series of chats with former Southall players. And our special guest for this episode is Ross Embleton. So, Ross, hello to you, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me on. Hello to everybody that's listening. Yeah, really looking forward to talking about everything.
Ross, you played for Southall, and I'd obviously like to talk to you about that. But by way of an introduction to you, just like to sort of go through your football CV, really, if you like. And I guess you're probably best known for your time at Leyton Orient. You were first team head coach there. But going back to 2000, you became youth development manager at Leyton Orient and did that until 2009. Then you went on to Spurs Academy integration manager for 2.5 years. Then Bournemouth youth team manager, Norwich recruitment officer, back to Spurs senior development coach, first team coach at Swindon 2015 to 2017, assistant coach and then head coach at Leyton Orient. Then you went on to Colchester United, head of recruitment, and now you're head of recruitment for West Ham's academy. I mean, that's quite an impressive football CV, and I'm just going to get my breath now. Um, with just there's quite a lot there, different clubs, and obviously that part of the world as well. So Colchester, West Ham, Leyton Orient. Um, would you say, in summary, that football's been good to you so far?
Yeah, yes, because I've been fortunate enough to date be in a career in football, which at 15, 16, when I was reality setting and I wasn't going to be good enough to be a footballer, the next best thing was this. And I'm incredibly proud of what I've done. I cringe a little bit when someone has to read through my CV like you have, because I suppose the no part to your question is the bumps in the road and the suffering of loss of jobs, difficult times in football that obviously now make you what you are, don't they? And they give you things to look back on and make you a stronger person. So on the whole, absolutely, I am very grateful and count myself very lucky for the opportunities that I've had, and proud when you mention, all of the clubs that I've worked for, because even though some of them have been tough at some stage during those periods that I've been at those clubs, it's been a really, there's been some real benefits to it as well.
But you got to work inverted commas in football in some senior roles, of course, but also um, you've been working in football and playing at the same time. So let's go back to your time as a player at Southall as a good example of that. You joined, I think it was in the 2010-11 season. And I think it's fair to say you talked about different experiences there. It was something of I think the polite way to put it is it was a bit of a transitional time for Southall, bit of a strange time sharing with rugby clubs and all sorts of stuff going on there. But can you remember how the move to Southall for you as a player came about?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how aware everybody is, but I think the chairman at the time was a guy called Channer. Um, and Channer, through my dad's connections in coaching, my dad's always coached within like academy football and grassroots football, but through my dad's connections to Leyton Orient, um, Channer had got Tommy Taylor involved with the club, and Tommy had approached my dad about becoming the manager of Southall. My dad had been involved in some non-league football, but never really sort of pinned down an opportunity for himself. So it was a really good opportunity like that. And we sat down when he took the job, and he was a bit like, right, great, we've got this opportunity, right, we better go and get a squad together. So that was my initial involvement. I've got to be honest. My initial idea was I had my own job and stuff at the time, and a young family, so it was very much I'll help you get a squad together. I wanted to get a young group of players together and try and balance the people that he knew with the boys or lads that were fairly local to where we were obviously ground sharing at the time. Um, So it was, my role in that was just to try to support my dad and help him get a group of players together. And obviously, with my connections at predominantly at Leyton Orient, it was to try and do that really. And then we sort of started to discover that the group were really talented but very young. And I was trying to get to most games just to be a support to my dad anyway. And I hadn't played for good 9 years at the time. Um, but I sort of found that I was there and I'm still good enough condition to sort of do it. So here and there, sort of dotted me in to support the young players really, and then I got the bug for it, if I'm brutally honest, and become like a fairly regular one in the team when I could commit to it really.
And what was that like? Because there were, there was a sort of Southall Leyton Orient connection at that time with the other players as well. So did that help in terms of, players probably knew each other already? Do you think that helped?
Well, what was great, the beauty for like again for my dad and for me was that what we'd managed to do, I suppose it was probably over like a scale of about sort of 6 or 7 years of pulling together boys that probably didn't really know each other, but had that connection to myself, to my dad, to Leyton Orient. Um, and we managed to pull together a team there like that had that sort of mutual connection across the like us as a family, but the Orient mainly. So they'd all played at the club, but not many of them really knew each other. So it was a bit of a strange dynamic. You were bringing in a group of players that the outsiders, or like I say, Channer and the guys that were the players that were from the sort of Southall other end of other side of London would have all gone, oh, here come the Orient boys, or here come the East London boys. But actually, not many of them really knew each other. They were just a group of lads that had that mutual upbringing at the same football club. Do you know what I mean? So it was quite unusual, really, but definitely the link drew everyone together.
And it's obviously, getting from that side of London to, that area of London on the other side is a bit of a trek at the at the best of times. So, how much of a challenge was that for those players? I know probably some of them lived in different places and so on, but still a bit of a journey, I imagine, for
Yeah,
some of them.
one of the great things that I think my dad did really well was he merged, like I've said a couple of times, there was a core of 4 or 5 lads that were from the area already. So at the time, it's really driving me up the wall, but I can't think of the club that we were ground sharing with at the time, right by Hanger Lane.
It was Hanwell Town,
And
but
World Town.
yeah.
So yeah, like you say, it weren't the prettiest of drives, whether you went around the M25 or around the A406. It wasn't the most enjoyable experience doing that. But I think what you get off the back of it is probably 3 or 4 cars full of lads making that trip across, and it sort of creates a little bit of camaraderie and a bit of a different experience. So that sort of mixture together was tough in terms of the balance between like where do we train, um, and people going sort of either coming to East London or the other way round. And then obviously if it was like a Tuesday night or even a Saturday afternoon game, it wasn't an ideal journey. And I'm sure there was probably a lot more local clubs that he could have stepped into, but it did make for something really good by just having that sort of time in the car with different groups of lads that you hadn't spent much time with for a while.
And back in those days, Southall were in the Middlesex County League, playing at Step 7 level, and you obviously had the promotion in 2012. But again, it was a strange time for the club, as at one point, when you joined, I think Southall were ground sharing, not even with a football club; it was Northolt
Yeah.
Rugby Club. You know, Firstly, that must have come as a bit of a surprise to you.
Yeah, it was honestly, there's probably about 3 or 4 things that I'm sure we'll come on to that happened in the time at Southall where you sort of think, what on earth made us commit to this? Do you know what I mean? Like, what was the real thing? Because, like I say, I hadn't played, but playing football wasn't something that I was overly bothered about, but something sort of seemed to grip everyone and bring us together. So, yeah, turning up for those games on that first period was surreal in terms of where we were playing and trying to get your head around like what sort of level are we actually competing at here? Because some of the grounds you'd go to would obviously be a bit more improved and a little bit better, and then you'd go to where we were playing home games and it was a bit bit up in the air, a bit undecided as to where the whole thing was trying to get to. And then our first actual game, or the first game that I took part in, was against Interwood, and we played at the old Leyton ground, which is in Lea Bridge Road. It's now nothing there anymore, but we played it on there, and I think we drew the game. But halfway through the second half, a helicopter landed on the pitch because there'd been a car accident outside. And that was almost like, now when I look back, it was almost like the start of like a crazy period of being involved in Southall. Everyone was sort of looking around as if to say, what is going on here? And obviously there'd been a fairly major car accident just outside the ground, and the helicopter had found its only bit of green to land on. So it's sort of the start of some really interesting events.
And for the opposition as well, obviously a lot of players they just kind of they go where they're told to go, and they turn up, and I expect some of the opposition players must have thought, are we even in the right place here?
Yeah, absolutely, and you wouldn't blame them for thinking a little bit strange. But like I say, for us, I could genuinely think now back to some of the lads that we'd asked to get involved, and obviously played at a good level and that sort of thing. I could maybe think back to myself of like they must have been looking at us and thinking, what on earth have you got us involved in here? It was yeah, it was a very very unusual start.
And then there was a ground share, at least this time with a football club. We mentioned it, Hanwell Town, and again, it sort of summed up that time at Southall. It was a strange season in a way because you finished third, and it was only I think it was only meant to be the top two going up automatically, but I think one of the other clubs couldn't go up because of the ground or something like that. So Southall got promoted, having finished third, went up to Spartan South Midlands League Division One. And I think you were working at Spurs back then, weren't
I
you? So
was.
how was that for you, that journey? Did you come in with other players, or did you come on in with your dad, or on your own, or how did that work?
No, because I was one of the drivers, if you like I say, with a young group of lads. Not all of them were drivers, and because of where we was having to get to, a lot of the time we was having to plan like a pickup from a couple of different stations, or making sure that we could get people en route, if you like. So I don't think I ever had the luxury of sharing a journey with my dad. And I was, like you say, working at Spurs at the time, and I'd be coming from like the borders of Essex. The training ground was in Chigwell at the time, so I'd be coming from there, or we had an academy venue in Hainault before the new glamorous Tottenham training facilities are built. But I was sort of always coming around from there, so my car would be the one to pick up, maybe on like the M25 on the A10, and sort of getting around there and collecting some of the boys on the route like that. So. The actual Saturday afternoons were always a real charge for me, like looking at my watch and thinking, am I going to get on the road and am I going to get there on time? And and also as well, what was on time? What would have justified me being able to be there to get changed, to be warmed up, to be able to play? And then am I too late and someone else will have to fill in? So it was always a little bit hold your breath. The midweek games that we did have were actually probably a little bit easier because um, could manipulate my work schedule, if you like, to make sure that I was on the road and getting there on the nights when I could.
Um, and as a player and the other players as well, how much were you aware of what was going on with the club in general? Because, I've spoken to some of the fans and they said it was a difficult, challenging time for the club. At one point, they weren't even convinced that there was even going to be a club. Various things going on. How aware of that sort of side of things were you as a player, and the other players as well?
Yeah, the other players definitely not. I think for myself and obviously my dad was the manager, but there's things that I could have said to you now in hindsight. We probably should have seen that coming. You mentioned right at the very beginning about there being almost like a bit of a, I don't think you reference it as a stopgap, but I definitely sort of see that now as probably what the intention was for my dad being involved in that. And obviously we didn't know. We thought it was something he was going to be involved with for a period of time. But you respect the situation now. So walking into it at the beginning definitely wouldn't or didn't see that. But I definitely think there was points and stages where we became a little bit more aware of the uncertainties of the club. Like I mentioned, Tommy Taylor getting my dad involved right at the very beginning. His son Lee was also around, but I don't ever remember really seeing them other than I mean we got to a cup final. I remember the first couple of games that Tommy was there, and then other that it was out, he wasn't, and it was almost a bit like I don't know, director of football, some sort of title that they had, and then all of a sudden we were sort of almost left to fend for ourselves. So now again, at the time, little bits of uncertainty because the people that got us involved were never really there. Channer and his people that he always had around him were really good people, and they always made it welcoming. Um, but again, you're never quite sure what the rationale or the plans were for the club for the future. Do you know what I mean? It all felt very temporary, and in the hope that we would or it was going to go somewhere, whether we were involved or not. So, absolutely, I can see that if I was a fan or someone that was looking at it at that time, I would have said, yeah, like it would have been really uncertain, I would imagine.
And you mentioned the fans there. I mean, what was your sort of sense you got from them? Did you? I think you mentioned sort of fairly early on in the conversation. You referenced the fact that a lot of you had those Leyton Orient connections, and you were seen as sort of like almost in a way kind of outsiders coming to
Yeah, yeah, for
Southall.
sure.
Did it feel a bit like that with the fans sometimes?
I wouldn't have said so. No, I think the person and the people that we would have been, that I am, but the people that would have been around at the time, all a lot of those were young. So the older players in the team would have been communicating with the people that were, making the effort to come and watch the games and that sort of thing. So I think that's without trying to sound like too appealing to a fan, but we all know how important fans are to a club. We've all been supporters. Do you know what I mean? So the fact that you would, hellos and how you doings and the beer in the bar afterwards, those things are incredibly important to any football club, but to a club like Southall with a handful of fans, I'm sure that would have been around at the time, that would have been key. So yeah, I would never have seen that there was anything like that amongst the people the people that did come to watch.
And how difficult or challenging or different of an experience is it to play at a club that hasn't got its own ground? And Southall have got a record; they haven't had their own ground since 1992. Obviously been playing at places like Hamwell, Burnham. Moving back to the area next season, Hayes and Yedding. Um, but how is that as a player, playing for a club that hasn't got its own ground essentially?
Yeah, I think it's tough. If I'm honest, for us at the time, probably not too tough because, again, like don't want to reference being an outsider too much, but like you go into that scenario not really knowing huge amounts about the history of the club, and like I say, because I was probably well, was a bit older than the rest of the team, you would have had an awareness of different people and different scenarios and talk to people a little bit more, maybe read up on it a little bit more. So you sort of have an awareness of that history. I think the difficulty of as a player probably not outrageous in terms of turning up to a changing room, going into a bar at a football club. You'd much like more love it to be your own and know the people that are behind the bar and that sort of thing. But those things I don't think get overly influenced. I think it's the things that if you are a fan or if you are an owner or a board member, like you never get that sense that it's yours, do you? You never get that feel of that real belonging to something because you're probably always looking over your shoulder and wondering what's coming next and where you're going to be off to in the future. So I think it definitely does cause that uncertainty. And I know a few people that involved in non-league clubs now who are still sort of searching for that home for their club, and I know how much they long for that, and they really hope that that's going to give them that real that real ownership and probably take the club to the next stage for everybody. But as a player, I don't think it was like something that we all sat in a changing room and worried about too much.
And you left in 2012. Obviously got the promotion. Um, when you look back now on your time as a Southall player, obviously your dad was involved. Um, how would you sum up the experience overall? Because sharing a ground with a rugby club, you know, finishing third but still going up, not at their own ground, all the stuff that was going on. Looking back now, how was that as an experience for you?
It was a brilliant experience for a number of reasons. One was that I got to work with on a football team with my dad. Um, that was, fantastic. And although we've both been involved in coaching in our various contexts across our lives and careers, and my dad's had other jobs, but to do something like that and be involved week in, week out on something like that was fantastic. And people can't take those opportunities and memories away now, which is fantastic. One of the things that he was sort of tasked with during his time was obviously not getting relegated, but then looking to try and get promoted. And like you say, didn't finish in the top two, but finished third and still managed to go up. Got to the cup final. Like it, that I felt like my dad really ticked boxes in terms of what he was asked to achieve and how he was asked to do it. Again, as well, like in terms of including some of the other lads that have been involved, it was an incredible memory for me. And like I say, I hadn't played. I stopped playing at 2021 because I wanted to go and concentrate on my coaching. So to then get an opportunity at the age that I did to then go and play again for a bit was great. To be able to look back on that. I've still got one of my, with all the things that I've done in football, I've still got in my top three memories was playing for Southall. We played in the cup and it was at home at Hanwell on a midweek game, and we turned up. We only had 11 players. It was the usual, oh, I'll get there at some stage, and we might have a couple of subs. And we lost someone in the first half to injury. Went to go up. So we were obviously down to 10 men, played most of the second half with 10, went down to 9 through another injury, 1-0 up. The other team equalised. We had a man sent off, so we went down to 8. Um, I don't know if this is on the records, but much of it is anyway. We went down to 8 men, and the other team went a goal up. So I think it was 2-1 at the time. And we were out pretty much. And I remember everyone was out on their feet, and I stood on the halfway line and I went to one of the young boys, just kick the ball as far in the corner as you can. The game's over. And he kicked it forward, and one of the boys chased it, Victor, down the line, and he nicked it off the defender and just hit it like complete hope, and it flew in the top corner. And we took the game to penalties and won on penalties. I scored the winning penalty. That's another part of the drama, but the whole thing was just surreal. And probably, like I said to you at the beginning, got a couple of different ideas and stories that had happened during that time. And I had a young lad at the time, he, again, might be on the records, but the young boy Sam Cheney, who'd just been released from Leyton Orient as an under 16, so he was still at school, and he'd been signed or offered his scholarship to go to Torquay. And I said to him, look, you've got like 3 months before you move to Torquay. Come and play some games for Southall. Stay fit, stay sharp. I'll look after you. You'll be fine. And he played in that game that night. And when I told him at the end, just kick the ball in the corner, he went to me, you've told me my whole life to never give the ball away, to pass, to dribble. And now you're telling me to just boot it in the corner. And I was like, Sam, you're playing adults football now. Just kick it as far away. I've had enough. I'm exhausted. And at the end of the game, I remember just looking round at him in the changing room, this 16-year-old boy that had never really been in a changing room with men before. And he had this complete and utter startled look on his face. And I still meet Sam for a beer every now and again. And whenever we have a new member of the on the night out or in the pub with us, this is the first story that we tell. And his dad was with us that night watching the game. Again, new experience for his dad, sitting there watching men's football and seeing his 15, 16-year-old son playing in that environment at the time, and to be able to walk away with a story like that and get through the round was incredible. So It's definitely, honestly, genuinely in my top three stories that I could tell across professional football.
And obviously, you're known for your time at Leyton Orient. You've been head coach. Uh, Tell us a little bit about what that experience was like. You know, the pressures from the fans, all that stuff. What did you learn from that, do you think?
God, incredible, man. And genuinely, honestly, whenever someone starts asking me that question, it sends shivers down my spine for numerous different reasons. The first one is that I had a Leyton Orient season ticket growing up. I used to go with my dad when I was, when I was 5 or 6, and then I used to go with my mates when I was 16, 17. And so I was an Orient fan. And so for me to be able to say that I've managed my football club, there's not many people out there that can say that. And then obviously Leyton Orient's it's never been perceived as being a big club in London, but it's a club that everyone knows in London. So for me to be a part of that history is something that I'm incredibly proud of. Obviously, the circumstances in which I got the job on the loss of Justin Edinburgh, having been his assistant for 18 months, again, is a spine-tingling thing to talk about because it was incredible loss, and hearing all the stories of Diogo Jota at the moment, people, the shock that it causes people after success, in which we'd had as well, and getting promoted from the National League was like a memory, but also at the same time like an experience that I'd swap it tomorrow if I could. But in terms of what I had to go through and the support that I had to give other people and the things that I learned off of being in that environment and that experience was it's probably not really words that can describe it. But in terms of learning and relationships with fans, like I was an Orient fan, so I was under no illusions that when I got the job on a full-time basis, that there would have been people out there. I know there was people out there that knew that I was the under nines coach at some stage, and who really wants the local boy who's a Leyton Orient fan who's done the under nines to be the manager. I totally understood that and respected that. I never quite got the nastiness and the severeness that people threw at you, but that's people, I suppose, and you get that in any environment, don't you? But that was always tough to deal with and take, and I always felt that, like, match days, like I would have my mum and my dad and my wife and my kids and like so many people at the game, and I always felt like an added responsibility to the club because it was my club. Do you know what I mean? So that was incredibly tough to deal with. And then I suppose the major last one is obviously the fact that most of my management tenure was during COVID, which not many people have had to do. So like a massive load thrown into that. But ultimately, like I say, Enders have probably started really like incredibly proud that I can say that I've been a League Two manager. I didn't really walk away other than losing my job. I didn't really walk away as a failure. So I never got relegated or, some of the things that a lot of other high profile, really good managers would have next to their name. I was fortunate enough to sort of manage my club and leave it in a place where others have gone on to build and make it even better.
All right, well, Ross, it's been great to speak to you. Thanks ever so much for your time. Um, so, if you have a connection with Southall, either a relative of a former player, you are a former player, and you'd like to have your say on our YouTube channel, please get in touch. You can send me a WhatsApp message to 07842 627 548. So, thanks very much, Ross, and great to speak to you.
Thank you.